That's all we got right now for Georgia football because there are actually other sports, surprisingly, despite the fact that we've been covering Georgia football this entire time. So that leads us into and brings Jed, our expert analyst, right over here.
Something like that.
Well, we like to think so. With he's bringing in men's basketball, and we're still sticking with the recruiting thing because this is big news, folks. With Anthony Edwards, the number 1 overall prospect, 5-star guard from Holy Spirit Academy. Number 1 overall, expected to be the number 1 overall pick in the 2020 NBA draft. Anthony Edwards is expected to announce next Monday, I believe, his decision. And right now it stands between, I think he just dropped North Carolina, and it was down to 4. Now it's down to 3. Dropped North Carolina. Now it's between Georgia, Florida State, and Kentucky. But as far as this, how big is this? I mean, we've mentioned before, Colin mentioned before, where Georgia's not a one-and-done program. They're not that's not at least the way they're going to be able to build a program around it. But this guy right here that would be the biggest thing so far for Tom Crean if he does land and he does pick Georgia. But Jed, what are your thoughts? Do you think he goes Georgia? Who do you think are the front runners for him? Just everything overall with his decision coming up next week.
I mean, personally, Colin was mentioning earlier. Like I said, Colin's a smart guy. He keeps up with recruiting and much better than I do. But he was mentioning that Georgia's kind of been building momentum here late. I think the crystal ball on 247 I'm looking at right now has Florida State with a 67% chance and Georgia at 33%. But that's not.
That's just
not an end all be all,
almost,
right?
Yeah.
But I think and I think I mentioned this on the first show I was on, however many weeks ago that was. But like basketball recruiting is different than I feel so much different than football recruiting because you have fewer players on a team, so one guy like this makes so much of a difference. And I think
he's the guy
that
we've
guy.
talked about that they need at least a guard coming in, maybe slot him in at point guard perhaps.
Right, and it's just not only would this obviously benefit Georgia. I mean, you think about pairing Anthony Edwards with a junior Rayshawn Hammonds and a junior Nicholas Claxton that will have had, I guess, probably a year and a half in Tom Crean's system by that point. It makes you think Georgia could be in a position to win multiple conference games next year. But I just think it makes not only will it help for next year, but it shows other recruits down the line, especially if Edwards comes in, has a great year, and gets drafted, say top 5, top 7, or whatever. So recruits you can come here.
Is he a program-changing recruit if you land a guy like this?
That depends
That's
on
the thing, because
where you go. So this guy's the number 2 overall prospect in 247 Sports Composite. In the last ESPN 2020 NBA mock draft, he was projected as the number 1 pick. 6'5", shooting guard, number 1 shooting guard in the country. This guy has a super advanced skill set. But we've seen with guys before who are great NBA players, if the situation's not right in college, it doesn't matter. Like Ben Simmons at LSU was a dumpster fire. Well, that was partially because he didn't want to be there. That was very clear. He didn't want to play in college basketball. But Anthony Edwards, will there be enough development next year to have that infrastructure around him to where he can take Georgia to that level of being a contender in the SEC, maybe a second weekend NCAA tournament team? That would take a lot of development from this year's team, considering what we've seen from them. But he could be that guy. If Anthony Edwards comes here, and he's like Jed mentioned on our first show, I remember you're going to have to need that one stud kid who's like, hey, I want to be the man at my in-state school. If he sets that standard and maybe leads Georgia to a Sweet 16, that will maybe persuade future of these 5-star guys that come out of Georgia, which is every year, be like, hey, I want to go to Georgia and one-up him. Maybe I can take Georgia to the Final Four while Tom Crean tries to build those pieces around him.
And just doing a little, I looked up probably the highest rated Georgia basketball recruit I can remember, Contavious Caldwell Pope, the class of 2011. He was also a 5-star, the number 12 ranked player in the country with the 247 Sports. So Anthony Edwards is number 2 in the country. And you mentioned development, and something Tom Crean mentioned at media availability yesterday was there's 3 college coaches right now that have 2 players in the NBA All-Star game. Next weekend or whenever it is. There's John Calipari has 2, Rick Barnes has 2, and Tom Crean has 2.
Yeah.
But he made a point of mentioning, hey, my 2 were 3-star recruits coming out of high school. So, development is really something that I think he prides himself on. Not to say that other coaches, they don't necessarily do that, but that's something Tom Crean really takes a lot of pride in.
Yep.
You think of guys like Victor Oladipo, especially. That seems to be a guy that he's really, really proud of, and for good reason.
And obviously Dwayne Wade.
Yeah.
Right.
That's his banner guy.
I've never heard of him.
Yeah,
Never heard of him before.
Yeah, he's overrated. But when you think of development, that's something that I'm sure Tom Crean has been selling Anthony Edwards over and over and over again in recruiting. That if you want to develop into a future NBA All-Star, NBA All-Pro, I'm the guy that can take you there.
You think that's his biggest selling point on Georgia at this point? Or, I mean, also other than, like, I don't know what goes into Kirby Smart's with he's telling these guys, hey, by the way, like, Athens is a wonderful city, great town, we have this great program. I definitely still feel like they have that ability, or Tom Crean has that ability to, when it comes to recruiting-wise, just being able to throw that out there. And
my phone just rang.
Who is it? Who is it? Studio.
I don't know.
Might be our first on-air caller.
It's some number I don't recognize, but they've called me many times and never left me a voicemail. So
it's a robot.
I think it is a robot.
I think it's Anthony Edwards about to call in and make a
decision. Is he going to leak his decision to me? Is that what this is?
Absolutely, man.
So Colin has a stalker.
He's about to go from Georgia, then he's about to go to your Dallas Mavericks. But as far as when it comes to selling Georgia, do you think it's somewhat of his system that he's trying to do? I mean, he has a very relatively high tempo offense, which is we're seeing this more in the NBA.
I think at this point at this point in Tom Crean's tenure, it's a lot of like I mentioned before, the development. B, it's a lot of I think being the guy, being the first in-state kid to come here and try to turn this basketball program around. And 3, Crean mentions it all the time, and I don't know how much of it is him just talking because this is what coaches do, but he always mentions there's so much at Georgia beyond life after basketball, the academic side of it, which I don't know, for a kid that's considered to be one and done, I don't know how much the academic side of it is that convincing. But we all saw how that worked with Ben Simmons. He essentially stopped going to class second semester, right?
Yeah.
So, but still, I mean, that's something that you can at least sell the parents on. So I think at this point, it's a lot of, be the kid that, starts the tidal wave of recruits coming here trying to turn this program around. And I think, and it depends on the kid. If Anthony Edwards wants to be that guy that sets the tone of a program like this, then I feel like Georgia's got, an advantage. If he wants to go to a historical program, like, Kentucky's in his Final 3, if he wants to go there and play with a lot of other highly touted 5-star recruits, then I feel like Kentucky's got an edge. And then Florida State's, another program that's been getting a lot of good kids in lately. So I think it just depends on this is such a roundabout way to get to an easy answer, but I feel like it just comes down to what Anthony Edwards, is really looking for in, these last 3 schools.
Also critical in this process, his final official visit this weekend will be to Florida State. So they're going to get the last word, and that could be critical, but maybe the allure of being the man in your state is enough. But Florida State, I mean, they've got a lot to sell. They were in the Elite Eight last year. They were in a really close game, very close to going to the Final Four, and they've got a solid team this year too. So,
well, I think one thing that Tom Crean, going back to what can he pitch to Edwards about being here, that he can be a leader, like you guys were mentioning, be the pioneer of the first guy to kind of stay in state, but he can come in, make a difference, and make the guys around him better. If Anthony Edwards is coming down the court with the ball in his hands, gets double-teamed, maybe finds a wide-open Nick Claxton, or he can elevate the players around him, and that's something that Colin was talking about a little bit earlier, and that great players come in and make everyone around them better. They elevate their game. They make the standard of play higher, and as a result, the team plays better. And so I think that's something he can do, and I think that's definitely something Tom Crean has said to him. Hey, you can come in, make an impact, make the team around you better, try and make a deep run.
Well, final decisions, where do you guys think he's going to end up? Jed?
I feel like he probably ends up in Florida State. Yeah. I personally feel like like I said a million times, I'm not as in tune with recruiting stuff. But
that last official visit
I think so. I think that's generally a pretty good sign. But, I mean, when he's down to 3 schools, Georgia at worst has a 33% shot. So you never know.
Guys, does he stay in state?
A lot of smart people covering recruiting seem to think Georgia can pull this one off. I'm just skeptical. Florida State has been considered a front runner for him for a long time, and And, that last official visit, I think there's a lot to overcome there.
Yeah, I think Kentucky is out of the conversation. I don't think he's going to be there. Obviously, anything can happen, but I think it's between Georgia and Florida State. And I genuinely don't know where he'll end up, but I tend to agree with Jed and that last official visit, having the final word, might make a difference.
Well, if he goes to Florida State, well, he won't. It's his loss because he misses out on Callie and Tito's week to week. So I mean, that's the biggest thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only selling point I would throw his way with me and my restaurants that I've got for him. But